I think most people of faith believe that they are on a journey of transformation, but actually they're in a project of reformation.
Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Reshape Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Morgan, and today we are talking about addiction. Specifically, I have a guest with me. Ian Morgan Cron is a best-selling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, Episcopal priest, and the host of the popular podcast Typology, which is based on the Enneagram test, if anyone's familiar with that. His books include the Enneagram Primer, The Road Back to You, which is an Enneagram journey to self-discovery. So just getting to know yourself better and your personality and your tendencies better. And it sold over 1 million copies, which is really impressive. And then his new book is called The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this is going to be a really interesting and somewhat broad conversation too about addiction, about um, personalities that might be more prone to addiction. And then we're definitely going to be incorporating some spirituality or faith components into this conversation as well, especially with your Episcopal priest background. There's just been some questions that have come up that I wanted to ask you on the role of God in change versus self in change. So I'm excited for that as well.
Great.
Yeah. So you've been pretty open with your journey, 30-year journey with addiction and recovery from that, from alcoholism. So can you kind of explain to me how the 12 steps really helped impact your life and maybe just give us an overview of the 12 steps?
Sure. So, thanks for having me on, Morgan. I I first was introduced to the 12 steps many years ago when I came into a 12-step recovery program for alcoholism. And I was a Christian at the time. And people were sometimes like, how could you have been a Christian and become addicted to something? It's like, well, it's called the human condition, right? Like just because you're a person of faith doesn't mean you're exempt
No.
from the struggles that all human beings have of dealing with life. And I like to say that the first time I was involved with the 12 step world, that I just audited the class. You know what I mean? Like I just,
You're
I
kind of
wasn't really,
feeling it out.
yeah, but I wasn't really quite taking the course for credit yet. Now,
Yeah.
the good news is that it expelled and removed the craving for a mood altering substance from my life. And I was abstinent for many, many years, right? And then in 2020, I had a relapse. I went to treatment for 30 days. I chose to keep that private, right? Because I'm not one of these guys who goes on Instagram and broadcasts all the dramatic news of his life to the world. I just don't think that's appropriate for me. And I just wanted to do my work, so that was kept to my family and friends, closest friends. And I'm really glad I made that decision because it gave me opportunity to work on the underlying causes and conditions of, well, what happened? Like
Yeah.
what happened? And why did it happen? And then about not so long ago, I thought, my life has been so blessed and revolutionized by working the steps, which, by the way, for your listeners who probably don't know much about the history of them, derived from a Christian organization called the Oxford Group.
Hmm.
So the steps are very compatible and they feather well with faith. Like really the steps are just the gospel laid out in 12 sort of
Interesting.
building block ways, you know? Um, and what got me excited was, wait a second, the steps would actually benefit anybody who has any kind of attachment problem or addiction problem or not, right? Like, in other words, it's like you don't need to like be a down and out person to use the steps. Like the steps are for everybody. And actually, I yearn for people to experience what I and many people have experienced in their lives as a result of working them. I want everybody to do them. Like it would change anybody, right? So that's the impetus behind the book.
That's great. And can you give us I don't know if you have them memorized, but just for people who aren't familiar with the 12 steps, I think I know a couple. Can we kind of start with that top view of what are the 12 steps?
Yeah, so I can just quickly go through them, but they're not too long, but let me just preface it by saying when you hear steps 1 to 3, it's really about mending your relationship with God, even if you think that's already mended. I think that's part of one of the things that people think. It's like, well, I've already got that done. I gave my life to Jesus. But it's like, well, let's just think about that for a second. Then steps 4 through 7 are really about mending your relationship with yourself. 8 and 9 is about mending and deepening your relationship with others. And then 10 through 12 is just about how do I maintain a lifestyle that supports health in each of those three domains of my life moving forward, right? That's basically the gospel, right? It's basically let's get right with God, let's get right with yourself, let's get right with others, and then let's like live focused on those relationships being healthy moving forward, right?
Mhm.
So here it is, 1 through 3. We admitted we were powerless over blank. Now you can fill in the gap here. You don't have to have it be alcohol or drugs. It could be, I admit that I am powerless over sugar. I am powerless over eating. I am, compulsive eating. I am powerless over workaholism. I am powerless over people pleasing. I am powerless over this particular relationship that I keep going back to despite the fact that it's harmful to me. I mean, everybody has addictions. That's just a fact, right? So the first one is we admitted we were powerless over blank, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Made a decision, 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So there's basically 1 to 3 is this in summary. I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. 1, 2, and 3, right? All right. So then you get to 4 through 7. 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7 is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So that's actually turning our gaze inward and saying, okay, I got to do some work here. I got to figure out what's going on inside of me that is, largely responsible for all the difficult emotions that I have, and dealing with the unmanageability of my life, and that also fuel my addictive or compulsive behaviors. Then 8, now we're moving into others, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, right out of the gospel. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. All right, now we're just dealing with our outward life, right? And then 10 through 12, maintenance. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12 is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to fellow sufferers and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Yeah, pretty much the gospel laid out in 12 steps, you're right. And I've never studied the 12 steps, so I think it's really interesting to hear you lay them out. We do have members who have struggled with alcoholism, and so I know the 12 steps have been life-changing for them. I wanted to take a brief pause here because not everybody listening to this show is Christian, and certainly not everybody listening even has a faith. They might be a spiritual person, they might not. So, step 2 in many of the steps relates to believing in a power greater than ourselves to restore us to sanity. So, what if you don't believe in God? What if you don't believe in a higher power? Can someone who isn't um, a person of faith or even a spiritual person find healing from working these steps? So, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so the steps are pretty are not, they do not hide the fact that it is a spiritual program.
Right.
Like the, the, the recovery is not a self-help program, right? And I always laugh. I tell people, listen, if myself could have helped myself don't you think myself would have done it by now? Like,
Mm.
self-help is kind of a funny term because, like, why do we even have self-help places in bookstores, right? Like, it's like, wait a minute, self-help? Like, what do we even have? If we could help ourselves, why are all these books out here?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, I think uh, I know many people in 12-step programs or who work the steps who would describe themselves as agnostics, right? And many of those people go on to embrace faith traditions later, but it's just an entry point. Like, can you just admit the possibility that there's a force out there that loves you, cares about you, wants the best for you, and can give you the power to change your life? So I love the fact that it's baby steps, right? And we oftentimes tell newcomers, all you have to do is be willing to believe that there's a power greater than you. Because so far, your life is not working out the way it's supposed to, right? And the only thing you need to believe in is that you are not that higher power, right? Like,
Yeah.
because clearly it's not working with you as the higher power of your life, right? So someone outside of you or something outside of you has to disentangle you from the things that are, imprisoning you. So the answer is absolutely. People can come in and start at any point along the journey of spirituality. Even if it's like, I know so many people come in and they're like, I want nothing to do with the God thing. But very slowly over time, they start to have a spiritual awakening as they work the steps, which is the point of them. And they come to believe in a power greater than themselves that loves them and cares about them. And
Mhm.
sometimes that morphs into their embracing Christianity or some other form of spirituality.
Yeah, I have two follow-up questions. So I know that one barrier to people um, initiating a faith life is they feel like people who go to church are hypocrites, because they go to church and then they still sin or they're still rude or they still do bad things.
Yeah.
And how would you answer that person who um, is using that as a reason to like not initiate some sort of faith or spiritual journey of their own, blaming other people that they're hypocrites for doing so?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on, well, a couple of things. One is, sometimes people have illusions, like they're disillusioned with church, right?
Hmm.
And I'm like, that's because you had an illusion. You can't be disillusioned unless you first had an illusion.
Mm, yeah.
So if you believe that all Christians or people of faith were going to be perfect and get along and live this like utopian life together, you had an illusion. Like, you need to own the fact that you understood this poorly. You can't put five people together in a condo association without problems breaking out. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like, what made you think this was going to be different? Right. Secondly, you're talking about a community of people who freely admit
right.
that they have problems that only a higher power, God as they choose to call him, can solve. So no, you should not be surprised at all that they act out in ways that are disappointing. They themselves are there because they know they act out in ways that are disappointing.
Mhm.
The only difference is that, like, at least they admit it. Like at least they're being honest. And then the third thing I'd say to those folks is, you know, are you just projecting your own shadow onto other people
Yeah.
and then beating it up? Because aren't you a hypocrite? Who's not a
Who's
hypocrite?
not, right?
Yeah, like
We all
a
have those
hypocrite.
moments. Yeah.
Yeah, so a hypocrite is somebody who has a set of values and then consistently fails to live up to them, right? Though they continue to espouse them. And I'm like, really? Like, you're going to actually be critical of other people who are not living up to their values when you yourself cannot live up to your own values?
I feel like a
Like,
hypocrite every day, but I keep trying and I'm like, that's fine. All
yes,
I can do is keep trying.
right. And isn't criticizing others for not living up to their ideals a form of hypocrisy on your own
Yep.
like behalf? So I don't know. I try to say that gently to people, but it is. I don't think it's a very helpful view of people.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm a really deep, like spiritual person myself. And so one of my favorite verses to remind myself of is, you have no right to look down or criticize your brother. Each of us will stand before the judgment seat of God. And so I think that, we're taking on more responsibility than what's meant for us when we're
Mm-hmm.
judging other people or calling them hypocritical. But the second thing that I wanted to just pick your brain about, just because you do have such a history with the Christian faith, is a member emailed me, and I'm just going to read the question so that you can hear the internal struggle that this member was going through. And then I'm going to synthesize the question in the best way that I could, and just let you roll with it. So, this specific member has struggled with alcohol in the past, food in the past, kind of what we're talking about here. And this person is a strong Christian. And so, really trying to bring that aspect into his change journey. So, this person wrote, "Can you help me work through how we change? As a Christian, we know that scripture says man is not good, basically evil with a bad heart or nature. Only one is good, and that one is God. How can we expect ourselves to change or do anything without God, or without God allowing the change? If I understand this correctly, real change, the life-changing type, can only come about through the quote unquote rebirth, or being born again. God steps in and replaces my heart of stone with a heart of flesh, essentially. I can't make any lasting change without God making the first move." So you can really hear just that internal wrestling of like, is this God allowing me to change? Am I,
Yeah.
channeling the change through me? So when I was thinking about how do I synthesize that, it's like, does change come from our own efforts because God does give us free will? Or is it God's grace working through us, as you mentioned earlier, being open to that invitation, being open to God's change? I wrestle with that too. I mean, it's such an interesting and thoughtful question that I wanted to bring to you.
It's a beautiful question. It's a
Yeah.
gorgeous question, actually. And I think I can answer it, but and I'll try to do it succinctly. But I actually address this very issue in the book, The Fix, right? So I think most people of faith believe that they are on a journey of transformation, but actually they're in a project of reformation. So, reformation is I'm going to try to be a good Christian. I'm going to try to change myself. Like, I'm going to work really hard to be like Jesus, right? And I'm like, how's that going?
Mm,
Right? Because on your own unaided willpower, you cannot bring about deep level transformation. You just can't, right? The same consciousness that created the problem can't solve it, right? So, um, like for example, if someone says to me, "I'm trying to be a good Christian," I might say to them, "Then you really don't understand the gospel yet.
mhm.
You don't have to try to be a good Christian," right? Like that's contrary to what scripture says, right? It's actually contrary to what my experience says of life, right? So I have a story in The Fix where and you'll have to forgive me because it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's about my son. When he was about a year and a half old, maybe two, I was giving him a bath, and I realized I didn't have a towel. So I ran to the linen closet to get one. And by the time I got back, now you know how this happens, he had taken an epic poo in the tub.
Oh my
Now, you know
gosh.
how little kids do that, right?
Oh.
And and while I was gone, he recognized that he had created kind of an environmental disaster, right? Like harp seals are dying. It's not good. Penguins are like, it's not good. And he has tried to pick it up to get it out of the tub and off of himself. And as he picks it up, it gets on his hands, and then he realizes, "Oh, my hands are dirty." So then he wipes it on his hair, and then he realizes, "Oh, my hair's a mess." And then he starts wiping it on the white tiled walls, right? And so by the time I get back, I have walked into he's just covered in his
So
own
dirty.
mess, right? And he has tried to fix himself. He's tried to clean up the mess by himself. And in doing so, he's created more of a mess, right? So
Yeah.
all of his best efforts have been for naught. What he needed was a power greater than himself, hello, Dad, to enter the picture and clean him up, take care of everything, get the place back to normal, right? And that is a really good picture of how transformation happens, right? So I believe that, and the steps help us learn how to do this, that transformation happens when not through our own unaided willpower and effort, but when we give God consent. This is a very big concept. Give God consent to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And that's actually just pure 12-step teaching. Give God consent to do for you what you cannot do for yourself. So that's why the steps sound very simple, but when you get into them and actually start working them, like you realize they have incredible depth,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, for example, look at steps like 6 and 7. Uh, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And then 7 is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Now, who's responsible there for changing us according to those two steps?
God.
God. And that's called grace. That's what grace is. That's the activity of grace in a human life, right?
Mhm.
You know that you are in a life-giving relationship with God when you begin to change without your even doing very much, right? Like God is inside
Right.
you,
Right.
bringing about changes organically, not by virtue of like effort. Now, here's the deal. There is a mysterious kind of dance between effort and consent. Like, obviously, I got to sit down, I got to do an inventory of what's going on. I got to look at the underlying, I have to look at where I'm broken and where things aren't working, and turn my attention toward um, uh, doing my part. But to understand that by doing my part, I am not saving myself. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just cooperating and giving God consent to do it for me.
Yeah.
That's transformation, not reformation.
Okay. Well, awesome. I also I wrote down some thoughts and I wanted to just share them with you and, you know, spitball with each other here. I think the first thing that came to my mind when you were reading the steps were a few lines, asked him to remove, just like you said, and can give you the power. Like God can give you the power. And those are right in the 12 steps, just like we just mentioned. And to me, that really reminded me of the vine and the branches verse in one of the gospels. I
Yes.
don't know where. Our pastor a few weeks ago did such a beautiful, beautiful message. It must be in John. I don't know, because we're going through the book of John right now. And um, it's essentially like, I can't do anything except through God. And so if we are removed from the vine, if we remove ourselves from the vine with our own free will, we can't do anything. And I
Yes.
loved what Pastor said. He said, our job is not to produce the fruit being the fruit of the Holy Spirit. So patience, love, gentleness, self-control, generosity, etc. Our job is not to produce the fruit. Our job is to stay connected to the vine, which
Yes.
to
Yes.
me read very much into the last few steps of the 12-step program, right? And so when we're considering like, is change coming from our own free will or is it coming from God working through us? I think our free will absolutely plays a part, but part of using our free will needs to be to invite God into the problem,
Yeah.
and admit that He is God and we are not.
Yeah.
But
So, Morgan,
go
can
ahead,
I
sorry.
interrupt you on one
Of
just really
course.
quickly?
Yeah.
I want to make sure that people understand that your willpower is far weaker than you think it is.
Hmm.
People talk about, I have free will as though it's powerful. Like,
Oh, that's so interesting.
right? Like, I got news for you. Like, in the face of your attachments and addictions in life, I tell people, it's like a traffic cone trying to stop an avalanche, right? Like if you have a sugar addiction or a food addiction, your willpower is like your addictions will eat your willpower for lunch. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Unfortunately. We're not
you
trying
are
to
a
make light of it, but it's just true.
it's just true, right? Like, this is what brings Paul to say, I don't know why I can't do the things
Yes,
I want
yes,
to
yes.
do. And I'm like, he's describing a bottom. He's describing that moment that alcoholics or workaholics, it's like, I can't stop working. I know I should. I see that it has negative consequences for my life, but I just keep doing it. And I don't know why. And it's like, well, because your willpower is no match for that power in your life. So you're gonna have to rely on some other power greater than you. And the steps, and now most people can maybe agree with this theologically, but experientially, they don't have a relationship with God that actually can bring about this kind of change. Because you
Yeah.
know what they're doing? To your point about the vine and the branches, they're just taping fruit to trees. They're just, I'm going to try. And it's like just taping fruit to trees, and it's all on the outside, right? This is an inside job. Like a tree produces fruit from the root system up. It doesn't have to try. It's a
Yeah.
very organic process, right? So, but what you can do is stay connected to God in such a way that that process happens unimpeded, right?
Hmm.
And actually, your own efforts often get in the way of God doing it for you. As strange and as passive as that sounds, it's just true. Like we just get in the way sometimes, where if we just stayed connected, it would happen on its own.
Okay, I have a couple. This is such a cool conversation. I just wanted to read that verse really quick that you mentioned in case people wanted to reference it. It's Romans 7:15 through 20. This is the NIV version. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do is not for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, then he goes on, blah, blah, blah. It's essentially like, why do I keep doing what I know I'm not supposed to do? Why do I keep doing what I hate? This is the human condition. And like, this is why I'm such a believer that we got to stay attached to God, because he is the one that can do great things through us. Um, I think I have a question about what are some signs that our own efforts are getting in the way? Like, what are some signs or symptoms that we are impeding God's work in our life?
Yeah, I mean, I think frustration for sure, disillusionment with faith because we're not
Mm.
seeing transformation. It can also be discouragement because I'm trying so hard and nothing's happening. A lack of joy is another thing. Self righteousness, elder brother syndrome, right? That feeling like, hey, I'm doing all the right stuff. Where's my reward here, right? So I think we tend to not actually pay attention enough to self-righteousness, right? Um, and you said, well, how do we know when we're getting in our own way? It's usually the self getting in the way, the ego self that Paul
Yeah,
talks about,
yeah,
the one that we would hopefully have, like, when Paul talks, like he says, for I have been crucified with Christ. All right, well, what does that mean? It's not that I'm not a big believer that, you are 100% bad all the way through and through and you're a miserable wretch. I don't, that's a particular theological framework that I acknowledge could be true, but it's just not, I don't buy it 100%. That said, um, what Paul is saying there, the word I in that sentence is in Greek is ego. For I have been crucified. So he's not saying that your identity is going to be annihilated, right? He's saying the false self, the self that runs on will, the self that runs on self propulsion, right? That wants to control everybody, everything in the environment, right? And bend it to its purposes, right? That narcissistic, crazy little part of you that wants to make life tolerable and workable apart from God's presence in your life. That's the part that, and by the way, I definitely want that to be crucified because that's the part of me that makes my life unmanageable and miserable,
Hmm.
right? And so it takes a minute though for I mean like to be crucified with Christ, it's like, crucifixions actually took a while. They didn't, you know what I mean? Like we have to
That's an
be
interesting
this is
concept
going
as
to take a
well.
minute. This is going to take a minute, right? And so it's a process that happens over time, and I think people get impatient. Like, well, why isn't this happening
Right.
now? Because we're
Yeah.
so used to a culture that says everything should happen instantly, and it's like the spiritual life. There are no hacks. They just don't exist in the spiritual life, right? And as one great theologian said, spiritual change is the slowest of all human movements. So we have to be patient. We have to be self compassionate. We make mistakes. We get back up. We keep going. It's just the nature of the animal, right? And shame will not help you at all. Shame will not help you change, even though we think it will.
Yeah, I think some people are they motivate themselves differently, and so some people use shame and they use guilt almost as like a fuel to their fire. Like, oh, I'm so fat, or oh, I did it again, or oh, I'm such a horrible person.
Yeah.
I need to do something different. And so it's kind of like, how would you speak into that and that self-talk into almost like the fuel that's driving their desire to change? One person might be running on, diesel that's like very pollution to their system, and it's negative and it's toxic and they don't even recognize it. And then what's the alternative to that? Because so many people, that's their default. They shame themselves, they guilt themselves, they speak critically to themselves in hopes that it will motivate them to want to do better. So how do we shift out of
Yeah. It doesn't work.
yeah.
I just promise you it will not work. And, if you believe that there is an evil force in the universe, I think one of its primary weapons is shame.
Mhm.
And that's why we're always reminded. Therefore, now there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. I mean, like when I had a 2-year old or a 1.5-year old, they're learning to walk, and they fall down. Did I beat that kid up for falling down?
Absolutely not.
Right.
No.
I just pick them up. I wipe off their butt, and I go, "Let's see if we can walk a little further next time." Right. And I do it with great love. Right. And if they cry when they fall, I go, "Oh, come here, baby. Let me help you." What makes us think that's not how God operates? Like I fall down, God goes, "Oh, dude, sorry. Let's get back up and we'll just keep going." I'm learning how to walk this new life, right? And it takes a minute to learn how to do that, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I find interesting, I'm a therapist, and so one of the things that I find so interesting is like internal family systems. And
Yeah.
in internal family systems, here's something I want people to hear. If you have an eating problem, right? I want you to stop calling it an eating problem. I want you to start calling it an eating solution. You have an eating solution. You have a problem in your life and you think overeating is going to solve that problem.
Mm.
You have anxiety, low self esteem, you have trauma, you have all these things going on in your life, and they really cause you a lot of distress. And you think, man, if I just eat a sleeve of donuts at 2 o'clock when I can't in the morning when I can't sleep, or if I have sugar, or if I take a drink, or if I overwork, it's going to make this pain in this other part of my life go away. Okay. When you turn to an external solution to solve an internal problem, it's like going to the hardware store to buy bread. It's just not you can keep trying, but the hardware store does not have the bread you want, right? You have to go to the right store, which is God. Right now, one of the things the 12 steps does is to help you change the solution to the problem, right? It's going to help you to address the
Interesting.
underlying problem that causes the compulsive behavior, right?
I've never heard anybody say it like that. And if people are a little bit confused, just rewind it like 60 seconds because it's such common language. Oh, I have an eating problem. I have an overeating problem. And what you're saying is, no, you're using eating, you're using overeating as a solution to an underlying problem. And
Yes.
so the 12 steps is helping you identify the real underlying
Yeah. And
problem.
where
Is that
does
what you're
and
saying?
where does that happen? Well, steps 4 to 7. I'm going to make a fearless and moral inventory. I'm going to admit to God, to myself, and to others. You're beginning to exhume, to unearth what's going on beneath the dirt line of your life that's causing problems above the dirt line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense
Like,
to me.
we
Yeah.
got to go down there and kind of root this stuff out. But good luck doing it yourself. So God has to be in charge of that process. Like you on your own will do what my son did in the bathtub. You will make more of a mess by trying to do this on your own, and you'll just get frustrated and disillusioned. You can go to a million therapists, and I'm a therapist. I am a big believer in therapy. So I would say to you, in addition to all your spiritual work, of course, go get outside help, right? No question. Go see a nutritionist, go see a dietitian, go see your doctor, go figure out what's going on, in that realm. But understand that real transformation, they're not going to give that to you, right? This is going to have to be a spiritual path that ultimately is going to save you from these compulsive behaviors. And by the way, the book is really written for people in this category, right? Like the steps are not just for alcoholics or drug addicts, or it's for everybody. We all have attachments and addictions. That is, you can't read the same Bible I'm reading without knowing that's true. You just can't. Like,
Hmm.
in what do we learn in, like, Isaiah, right? We all of us are drinking out of broken cisterns.
Hmm.
That right, and the water in there is just brackish and toxic, and it runs out. So every time I go to, if I was an alcoholic, every time I go to have it, I'm just drinking out of the wrong well.
Yeah.
I'm trying to solve problems. And I mentioned IFS, and this is important, right? Like, without going into the system too deeply because we don't have time, but like, understand that there's just a part of you that comes up with solutions. It's like a fighter inside, right? And it sees pain in some other part of you, and it's like, I need to put that fire out. And it comes up with not so great strategies to put that fire in the other part of your life out, like overeating or drinking or overworking or overexercising or whatever. And the problem is that the solution that part of you comes up with eventually becomes a bigger problem than the problem it's trying to solve. So now you're overeating, or you're drinking, or you're taking too many anxiety medications, or you're, whatever you're, people pleasing, relationship addictions, gambling, whatever it is, right? Like, it becomes a bigger problem than the problem it's trying to solve. And that's when you have to really do your work. And the steps helps you do that.
I love that. What you unpacked was just gold there. I think one big barrier, as I was reflecting through how would I answer that member's question, is one's perspective on God. Because we're both Christians and we both have the Christian perspective that God is good, that God is loving, and that God deeply, deeply cares for us, and that God is in us through the Holy Spirit. That is not everybody's perception on God. Some people believe that God is just, this scorekeeper up in the sky, or that God doesn't care, that he's an absent father. So much tragedy happens, and then just from personal experience, I've witnessed people's faith lives transform from very rich and very comforting, receiving a lot of that love and security from God, to how could God let this happen? I don't know that there is a God, and if there is a God, I don't know if he's good. So do you believe that that is part of this process as well, as like reframing your relationship with God?
Yeah. Don't you think, like, listen, I don't care who you are, you're always going to have to keep updating your understanding of who God is, right? It's not like, oh, I became a Christian, now I completely understand God and how he works, right? It's like, no, actually, that's not anybody's experience, right? So one of the things I love about the steps is, like, step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I'm always like, when I work with people of faith who are struggling with any kind of addiction, I'm like, we need to actually go back and revisit what your conception of God is,
Right.
because it's clear that there's some distortions there and some misunderstandings about God. And I don't know anybody who shouldn't always be in a process of evaluating and thinking, is my understanding of God accurate? How does it need to change? And I love that the steps, even for a person of faith, is like helps us to really face what what reality is when our relationship with God, right? And because so much of what our conception of God is based on is our relationship with our first caretakers.
Yes.
With sometimes we've come out of faith traditions that fed us lies, actually.
Hmm.
Like I deal with a lot of people with spiritual trauma who have been told that they were evil and God hated them. And you know what I mean? And it's like,
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
whoa, you came out of a tradition that did not give you an accurate picture of who God is.
Yeah.
And so, we're always on this journey of coming to more clarity about who God is. And again, the steps help. And just so your listeners know, the book, there's a workbook you can get with it. It's 120 pages. So it's not like one of these fluffy workbooks. It actually walks you through the steps in a way that kind of gets down into the meat of them, and it helps you to go, oh, okay, so now I need to do some work of maybe better understanding the love and the nature of God and about who I am, and you know in a way that's really kind, and thorough.
Yeah. That's amazing. And we'll be sure to link up the book and the workbook in the show notes. Um, I was just kind of reflecting on what a relief it is, just as a person of faith, when I remember to do so, um, just to like give myself some grace and recognize that I am responsible for far less than I like to give myself credit for. And um,
Yes.
it's a little bit of a relief, when we don't have to try so hard to produce the fruit. And when we remember our only job is really to stay close to God, stay mindful. And let's go into some tips there, because it's really easy to say that. Well, stay attached to the vine, stay close to God. How do we do that in a world that's full of distractions, in a world that loves instant gratification, in a loud, noisy world? Like, what practical advice do you give to people to stay connected to God so that He
Yeah.
can work through us?
Well, interestingly, the steps recognize that the world really works against a person who wants to have a deep spiritual life, right? So, like in step 10, right, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. So, really, the steps have one purpose. Interestingly, it's not to stop drinking or overeating or, whatever your compulsions are. That's actually not the point. That is a byproduct of something, right? The purpose of the steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it renders our need for external solutions to internal problems unnecessary, right?
Can you say
Like,
that again? Because that was
sure.
very powerful. Say that line like one more time.
So the purpose of the steps, as stated by the steps, is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of sufficient force that it renders our need for external solutions to internal problems unnecessary, right? So how do we, stay connected? Well, once, we, like, for example, for me, the 12 steps teaches me about a morning routine that begins the day. Like I start every day with what's called the third step prayer. I say it before I get out of bed, right? It is, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Help me to overcome my difficulties, um, that they may bear witness to thy love, thy power, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. So right away, I'm starting the day off with this focus on not myself, like, I'm going to go into the day just blasting through it with my will. I'm actually beginning with surrender. And surrender and letting go are big parts of a 12-step program. It's recognizing that I have no power over people, places, and things. You don't. It's a, we can, I always, in the book, I think I say this one line, I say, I don't know why people think that they're so powerful when half of us can't, sneeze and not wet ourselves. You know what I mean? It's like, what, are you kidding me? You think you're powerful? Like, you don't even have control over your bladder, for crying out loud, and yet you think you have control over your world? Like, that's nutty. So,
Yeah.
you know, um, I love too that the steps are not something like you do once and then you're done. Like, that's not how it works. You go through the steps in order first. With, usually it's helpful if it's with another person or a little community that you form or that you go and be part of. Um, and you um, then after a while, you work with the steps long enough, the numbers kind of fall away and you just start to do things out of the steps reflexively, right? Like, for example, if I get snappy with my wife, I think, oh boy, I'm going to have to go make amends. Step 9, here we go. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, right? And so, or I may say, oh, I'm so anxious this morning about this meeting. And I go, oh, time to do a step 3, right? Um, I'm going to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I'm nervous about this meeting, but I'm just going to turn it over because I don't have control over the outcome, right? So you just eventually become so fluent very quickly. You become very fluent in just this way of life that is very gospel minded. But most people, honestly, Morgan, they don't have a plan. Like, they're doing their best. They're Christians, but they're kind of just thrashing around inside of biblical ideas. But there's no
Yeah,
plan.
I would agree with that. I think the 12 steps really provide a nice framework or structure, just like you were mentioning, where it's kind of like cleaning house the first time through, and then once it's clean, it's easier to put things back where they belong.
I love that. I
Yeah,
love that illustration. I'm
you
going
can
to use
steal
it.
it.
Thank you.
You can use
Uh,
it.
so yeah, but that's true. So the first time you clean a house, it's a little bit of work. That's the first time you do the steps. But
Mhm.
once you've done the steps and you're in this process of mending and deepening your relationship with God, with yourself, and with others, after that, it's maintenance,
Well,
right?
and wouldn't you agree that it's easier to see when something is out of place when everything is first in its right place? But if
Yes.
everything is just kind of chaotic in your environment, as you were mentioning, you're just kind of floundering around in scripture and no structure. And um, but once everything has a place and everything is in its place, it's so much easier to be like, oops, that's out of place. Let me take care of that.
Right. And that happens a lot, right? Like, sometimes I'll be, you know, I'm experiencing, let's say, anxiety or regret or something like that. That is a signal. Like, your feelings are signals that something's not going right. Oftentimes, rather than dealing with what's not going right, we try to find a way to make the feeling go away.
Yeah.
And that could come with chocolate donuts or eating, you know what I mean? Like, it could
Yeah.
just, whatever it is, let's just get and that's why the title of the book is The Fix. We're always looking for fixes.
I was wondering, I was going to ask, yeah, why was the title named The Fix? Yeah.
Well, right, it's a double entendre, right? Like, everybody goes looking for a fix. And what I'm saying is the fix to our problems can be accomplished by working the steps, right? That's the real fix, right? Now, I'm not saying it's the only system. I'm just saying it is a proven system that has clearly helped tens of millions of people completely and utterly change their lives for the better. So we should actually say, well, maybe that would be, given its success rate, maybe I should take a look at it,
Hmm.
right? So, yeah, so that was the reason behind the title.
I love that. Okay. I know that we didn't really get to the Enneagram stuff today, which I think is okay. This is a very deep conversation, and I really appreciated just being able to kind of pick your brain from a Christian's point of view on what is our role in change and God's role in change. And I know my member will be very happy with this interview and the depth that we went there. So can you let people know where they can find your book and the workbook, and if they're interested in learning more about Enneagram stuff, where they can find you on that?
Yeah, so the title of the book is The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between, which means everybody, right? Um, you can find that, I mean, everywhere, like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, wherever you buy books, it's available. In terms of Enneagram stuff, I'm glad you asked, right? So the book that I've written two books on the Enneagram, but the one that's best for someone who's coming at it fresh would be The Road Back to You. And I also, if you go to my website, which is iancron.com or ianmorgancron.com, they'll both get you there. Um, there's an Enneagram assessment that you can take to find out what your type is. And I'm super stoked about it because it's a really powerful instrument. You'd get like a 22-page report on the back end that describes your type and your wing and your subtype and all the stuff, right? And you could get started with your journey of learning your Enneagram type and what that's all about there.
And really quick, will you just explain what that is, what it's based on? I think I'm an Enneagram 3, but I don't remember what my wings are, what
Yeah.
wings mean.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so the Enneagram is a personality typing system, and it teaches that there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood, just as a way to cope, to feel safe, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the world of this new world of relationships in which we find ourselves, right? And there are beautiful parts to your personality. And I would describe personality as how you just habitually and predictably show up for life, right? That's not a very clinical definition, but for our purposes, it works, right? And so, we just learned that there are some really beautiful parts to it and there are some really unhealthy parts to it. And if we can learn what the unhealthy and the beautiful parts are, we can begin to exercise better self governance, like making better choices, and understanding, why do I always act, think, and feel this way? It's like, well, a lot of it's just personality based stuff that you're doing, and some of it's great. And when it's not great, it's really not great. So we can just begin to get some clarity. So if you were a 3, right, like
Mhm.
you would be more likely than a lot of other types to be a workaholic,
Yep.
right?
Achiever. Yeah, that's what.
An achiever, right? They're
Yep.
called a performer. And so when you're doing great, you actually are really good at helping other people succeed versus just looking out for your own interests to be successful. When you're not doing great, you will kind of be always swapping out masks in order to win people over and to gain their admiration and all that stuff. Versus when you're healthy, you're willing to share your failures with other people and how you've made mistakes so that they won't make the same ones, and you're not worried about your image anymore.
Mm.
So this is just like these little things that
I
you learn
love
about
this. I
yourself.
eat this stuff up. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it's not perfect like anything else, but it's super useful. And
Yeah.
it gets us better understanding our motivations, our fears, and how we can just show up better for the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to do that assessment. And I love learning more about myself and my strengths and my areas for opportunity to get better. And, just I'd like to say become the best version of myself, just continue to, you know, I don't know. I think that that's kind of our purpose on this earth, to honor God, is just to do that, to become
Yeah.
the
And
best person
what's
you can be.
I was just speaking at a conference in California this past couple of days, and I quoted for them what John Calvin says at the beginning of the Institutes. Right? He says, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God." Now that's a big statement. Without knowledge of
Mm.
self, there is no knowledge of God. And then prior to that, Saint Augustine wrote, "Lord, may I know myself that I may know Thee." So what the Enneagram does is really part of a great Christian mission, which is I have to understand myself. And when I understand myself, I will better understand God.
That's so interesting. I would have thought it was maybe the other way around because,
That's the, yes.
when I know God, I can know myself better because
Yes.
I don't, other
Well,
stuff, that's my
it's
natural.
actually both.
Yeah.
It's actually both. But most Christians only focus on what you're saying, which is I just need to know more about God and I'll know myself. They don't actually know that the inverse is equally as important,
Hmm. I like
right?
that.
And oftentimes people unconsciously really don't want to know themselves, right?
They're
They
like
want to,
afraid, what am I going to find? What's
yeah,
my
yeah,
Enneagram going to say about me? Yeah.
yeah. And actually, that's a big mistake in life, right? We 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 have to do the work of understanding who we are and what you also are going to discover. Sure, you're going to find some things out about yourself that are a little cringy, but you're also going to find beautiful things about yourself that you didn't know.
Hmm.
So it's a great adventure.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that. And I just really thank you for this conversation. This is definitely the most like spiritual based conversation, change based conversation, but the timing was absolutely perfect since I just got that email from the member, and I've been mulling over that and reflecting over that question, and I feel very aligned with kind of everything that you said. I hope our audience found this really helpful and they go get your book or books. And thank you so much for your time and, all the time and research and work that you've put up until this moment, to be able to be here to share that with us.
Well, Morgan, thanks for having me on. I really had fun.
Thanks.